Afternoon, everybody. As Jeannie had mentioned, my name is Kevin G., currently an associate professor in the School of Education at UC Davis. So today what I wanted to do with my time with you, we have about 10 minutes together, is to give you a high-level overview of California's system of support, specifically a program called Differentiated Assistance, which I'll call DA, and how students with disabilities fit into that system. So what I wanted to do, there's really three objectives or three key questions I wanted to go over. The first is, what is differentiated assistance? I know some of you on this webinar already know what the system is, but I just want to make sure we're clear about what DA is and how it functions. So first, what is differentiated assistance and how do districts become eligible for it? Second thing I want to cover with everyone today is how do students with disabilities really factor into that eligibility for differentiated assistance? And then finally, I want to do a bit of a deeper dive on how district-wide performance of students with disabilities looks like on some of the key state indicators that underlie the assistance system, for example, chronic absenteeism, and how does that compare to students overall? So just to give you a high-level overview of differentiated assistance, many of you know that California has sort of this three-tiered system, level 1, 2, and 3. Differentiated assistance sits at that level 2 tier of assistance that are provided to LEAs or districts. And really differentiated assistance is individually targeted assistance that's really, focused on identifying key performance issues as they relate to some of the indicators. And it's also really targeted to highlight some of the disparities or gaps in performance that occur between student groups as well. In terms of who provides differentiated assistance, it can come through county superintendents, charter authorizers, the CDE, as well as the California Collaborative on Educational Excellence. So what does actually differentiated assistance look like on the ground? Like, what are the components? And this is actually specified in California's Ed Code, section 52071. And I want to highlight this is among other things. So it's a broad sort of suite of support services. But the ones that are specified specifically include, it could include identifying or helping a district identify its strengths and weaknesses. It can also involve supports involving academic experts or a team of academic experts who assist the school in identifying and implementing effective programs. And then finally, differentiated assistance, as I had mentioned, can come through this organization, the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence. Now, how does a district actually qualify for differentiated assistance? There are multiple ways, so I want to cover one mechanism through which a district is identified for differentiated assistance. So first, as many of you know, there are a set of indicators that align with state priority areas. I'm going to be focusing on 4 state priority areas. But as you can see here, for example, priority 6, which is school climate, the indicator underlining school climate is the suspension rate indicator. Similarly, for example, state priority 8, which is outcomes in a broad course of study, the underlying indicator for that state priority area is the college and career readiness indicator. So given indicators that underlie these state priority areas, for each subgroup in a district, for example, students with disabilities, there are performance color codes, which again, many of you who have been on the California dashboard are familiar with. So they're assigned color codes based on both the status and change for each of the underlying indicators. So this is a basic example using chronic absenteeism, for example, right? So if we can see on the left-hand side here, we have the status category. So for example, if we had a district who was in the high status for their students with disabilities for chronic absenteeism, say it was 15%, and yet they increased from the prior year by 3 percentage points or more, they would be assigned a red color code, okay? And again, we can do this for all of the other indicators. And just to let you know, I'm doing in like really short amount of time what's laid out in a pretty comprehensive 200-page technical dashboard guide that the CDE has put out. So, I'm giving a high-level overview and not necessarily getting at some of the more nitty-gritty nuances. If you want to learn more about the nuances about this, definitely consult the California Technical Dashboard Guide on this. So after these color codes are assigned, then one way a district can be identified for DA is if one or more of their student groups in a district has red performance level on an indicator for at least two of these four state priority areas, okay? So just as a basic example, a district will qualify for differentiated assistance if its students with disabilities population was red on chronic absence, which is priority 5, and red on suspensions. Okay, so that gives you, again, a good overview of how a district actually qualifies for differentiated assistance. So let's turn to how students with disabilities are factoring into this differentiated assistance system. So we have about 1,000 districts, a little over 1,000 districts. About a third of those, around 333, qualified for differentiated assistance using the system that I just told you about in 2019. 187 of those 333, so about half, were identified based on the performance levels of their students with disabilities, and that's either alone or with other student groups. Now, among those 187, 114 were identified based on students with disabilities plus other student groups, and those other student groups can be, for example, foster youth or homeless youth or socioeconomically disadvantaged youth. But there's also 73 districts who qualify for differentiated assistance based on their students with disabilities populations alone. So I think it's important to sort of hone in on who those districts are and the types of supports that they may need to support their students with disabilities. So I think one thing that this differentiated systems does is it allows us to really look at the intersectional challenges, as Jeannie had mentioned, that exist at the district level, district-wide level. So this table that you'll see in the report that I worked on really highlights where those intersectional challenges are happening. So for example, if you see the top row here, 35 of the districts that qualify for differentiated assistance based on Part due to their students with disabilities populations, 35 of those districts qualified because students had low performance levels in pupil achievement as well as pupil engagement, okay? That means they're red on ELA or math, or they're red on the graduation rate or chronic absence, okay? So these are two areas that kind of go hand in hand with each other when it comes to differentiated assistance for students with disabilities. Again, another 33 of these districts are qualifying for differentiated assistance based on low performance levels of their students with disabilities, both in pupil engagement as well as their college career readiness indicator. So again, I think differentiated assistance helps really shine a light on intersectional performance challenges of students with disabilities. So that's really just not, pupil achievement that's driving assistance. It's pupil achievement plus other indicator areas. And in the policy brief that you have access to, I do even a deeper dive to look at the specific indicators underlying these state priority areas. So how do students with disabilities actually perform relative to all students in general? So here you see two different graphs. What I'm doing here is just to show you the mapping of the performance levels. Again, red is the lowest performance level, blue is the highest performance level, and this is on the college and career readiness indicator. This is basically the percentage of students who are graduating within 4 years or are meeting some clear benchmarks like taking the A through G requirements. I think this shows you a really stark difference, right? So all students are here on the left. So we see in terms of all students at the district level, there's, we see green and blue. Here we see much higher concentrations of students with disabilities in the red and orange performance levels here. And I think this is critical when we think about students with disabilities who are sort of preparing to transition out of formal schooling into the workforce. A second outcome that I want us to look at is chronic absenteeism. I do a lot of work in this area. These are students who are absent 10% or more of the school year for any reason. You can see here when we look at the performance level of students with disabilities at the district-wide level relative to all students, we see something that may look comparable, right? We see sort of a higher concentration of students with disabilities in sort of this orange performance level, which is just right above that red performance level. But I think what's key is a differentiated assistance system is based on district-wide performance. And I think this is where it's important that we think about using the continuous improvement process to start drilling down deeper. And so this is a table on this next slide that actually comes from a second policy brief that you have access to as well, where we're using data from the core districts. These are some of the largest districts in California. And we do a deeper dive on how students are performing by disability category. So you saw in general the broader district-wide performance level of students with disabilities. Here, when we do a deeper dive by disability category, we see really interesting patterns by disability type in terms of chronic absences, right? So if we just look at this third line here, kids who have emotional disturbances, especially in 9th through 12th grade, 50% of those kids with the emotional disturbances in the core districts are chronically absent. So I think we need to be thinking about sort of drilling down deeper on some of the data that we have, especially when we look at students with disabilities by disability category. So just to wrap up, some summary points and some takeaways here. So over half of the districts that qualified for DA did so because of students with disabilities. They were red in 2 or more state priority areas. And 78 districts, about a quarter of those districts, qualified solely based on the performance levels of their students with disabilities. I think when we look at districts, again, the differentiated assistance model helps us look at intersectional performance challenges. So we see that students with disabilities have low achievement in ELA and math, as well as student engagement, either their graduation rate or chronic absence. So again, I think these are areas of challenges that present challenges, but also areas of focus and targets of opportunity. Similarly, districts are qualifying for DA based on both engagement as well as college and career readiness for their students with disabilities populations. A couple of questions that I think I want to pose to the group and broadly as we think about serving students with disabilities better. Obviously, this is sort of a high-level overview. This is descriptive. I can't get at the root causes, but I think this is where the continuous improvement process can play out. So I'll pose this to everyone to think about, what are the root causes behind some of these intersectional challenges? I think a second important question for districts to ask themselves, as well as schools and school leaders, is when we look at a district student with populations, who is really experiencing these challenges? And if we can not only look at this question by disability type, but there's also this can play out also by gender as well as race, ethnicity. And then finally, I think it's important that we also think about evidence-based practices. So what are the evidence-based practices that districts and schools can leverage to address some of these intersectional challenges? And finally, I just want to thank you. I want to thank the PACE group, and I appreciate the opportunity to work on this. If you do have questions, I'm happy to answer those. Thanks, everyone.